Hi everybody, this is Tom over at Harborside Marina and Yacht Sales. Today we're over at the fabulous Shanks restaurant in Clinton Harbor. It is a beautiful, warm February day, very unusual, but I'll take it. Starting to feel like boating weather, so we decided to do a little bit of a primer on anchoring. We're going to talk a little about picking anchors, picking the correct size rope or rode, and then we're going to talk about some of the factors involved in anchoring. So, first thing to get out of the way, a little bit of terminology. Your rode is the rope you use for anchoring, and then scope is the amount of rope you put out when you're anchoring. So that way there won't be any confusion when I'm talking about it. So picking an anchor for a boat that doesn't already have an anchor, for around here, good plows or good anchors are a plow anchor, like this one right here, or what's called a Danforth. Both of those work really well for anchoring around here. When you're picking out a rode size for your boat, the general rule of thumb for minimum sizing is an 1/8 of an inch of thickness for 9 feet of boat. I always generally round up because it doesn't hurt to be a little oversized. So say you have a 36-foot boat, that's 1/2 inch rope. And then sizing for chain, you just take whatever that number is and divide it by half, so you would have 1/4 inch chain. Things to consider when anchoring with either rope or chain. With all rope, you need to use 7-to-1 scope. And with all chain, you can get away with a little bit less, 5-to-1 scope, which means if you have an all chain rode, you can anchor in deeper water with the same amount of rode. So let's start getting into things to consider when you're actually coming into an anchorage. In no particular order, we have wind, current, tide range, tide state, water depth, the terrain around you, other boats, and then the draft of your boat. So, say you're coming into this harbor, you try to find a spot right in the middle. Let's say you're going to anchor right here. Obviously this boat's massively out of scale, but you come in at dead low. And so you're in 6 feet of water, chart plotter says so, and your depth sounder says so. You can't anchor for the water that you're in, you have to anchor for the water that's going to be under you at high tide. So just for the sake of argument, making numbers easy, if you're anchoring in 6 feet of water at dead low, and say we have a 4-foot tide, that means at high tide, you're going to be in 10 feet of water. Now, so if you think about your 7-to-1 or 5-to-1, if you're planning for your high tide with an all rope rode, you'd have to put out 70 feet of rode. If you're doing it with chain, you only need 50 feet of rode. You can start to see immediately how having all chain means you can anchor in much deeper water. Good things to look out for as you're pulling in. Try to find a landmark on shore, preferably a flagpole with a flag on it, because that gives you a few things. It gives you wind speed and direction. For example, if the flag is limp, it's below 5. If it's kind of flopping around, it's probably 5 to 10. If it's straight out, it's more than 15. Other good thing the flagpole gives you is a fixed point of reference, so that after you put out the anchor and set the anchor, you can use it to see if you're drifting at all. Other things to consider, like I said, wind and current. Ideally, you want them going in line with each other, because if you have current over here and wind over here, you're probably going to oscillate between the two, and that'll make you a little bit less comfortable. If you're anchoring for the night, you really have to consider if the wind is going to die out at night, get stronger at night. So you have a little bit more to think about if you're staying overnight. I already talked about tide range. In this case, we're saying we have a 4-foot tide. Tide state, we already talked about that. I said we're coming in at dead low. Water depth. Water depth is important where you are now, and as well as what I like to call the circle of influence. So just draw an imaginary line in your mind of where your boat is, and then you got to figure you have to be able to swing 360 degrees all the way around without either running aground on the shore or running into other boats. So if you see these other boats around here, other boats in the area, you have to consider, is it much bigger than you? Is it a sailboat? Those things affect how the boat swings. Another thing to worry about with other boats is if they're anchoring or on a mooring. If they're on a mooring, they swing around a lot less because it's a shorter line. Sailboats or large power boats have a lot, large power boats have a lot more windage, so they're affected more by the wind. Sailboats have a lot more boat in the water, so they're affected more by current. I've come out in the morning at times after anchoring, and I found that a powerboat and I was on a sailboat have swung transom to transom to each other, and that's not something you really want to wake up to in the morning. Last thing you have to concern yourself with is your draft. On this boat, let's say we're on a 30-foot center console, so you're only drawing 2 feet of water. So that's not much of an issue. And as you can see, if we're looking at our circle of influence here, we're pretty much good on everything except possibly these 2 power boats. And that's something you just have to kind of keep an eye on. When you're on anchor, it's not a secure position. You always have to keep an eye out for the weather, the wind, the boats around you, and you just have to be aware. I think that's the gist of most of everything you need to know for anchoring. So I'm Tom. I work for Harborside Marina and Yacht Sales, and I'll see you out in the water.